When you understand how a man's ego works, everything in the dynamic changes. Not because you're trying to manipulate him, not because you're trying to play games, but because you finally recognize the truth. A man loves the woman who challenges the version of himself he's been hiding behind. Hurt his ego, not his heart, and you awaken something powerful inside him. You make him confront the mirror he's been avoiding, and that mirror shows him who he really wants to become. A man's ego is his armor. It's that protective shell he wears to look strong, confident, unshakable. But the truth is, ego cracks under the pressure of a woman who sees through it. When you call him out, when you hold him accountable, when you stop feeding his comfort zone, that's when he starts paying attention. Not because he wants to defend himself, but because he starts to feel something deep, something real, something he can't ignore. It's not about insulting him. It's not about disrespecting him. It's about refusing to let his ego run the relationship. When you stop entertaining excuses, when you stop accepting half effort, when you stop clapping for bare minimum behavior, you create a shift. Suddenly, he feels the difference between a woman who tolerates him and a woman who inspires him. And trust me, a man never forgets the woman who challenges him to rise. The moment his ego feels that sting, when he realizes you won't fall for the performance, when he sees that you notice the gap between his potential and his actions, that's when he starts loving with intensity. A man doesn't fall madly in love with the one who pampers his ego. He falls madly in love with the one who awakens his growth. Because growth is uncomfortable, and anything that makes a man uncomfortable stays on his mind. Hurt his ego by not chasing. Hurt it by not competing. Hurt it by showing him you're not afraid to walk away from anything that isn't aligned with your standards. Hurt his ego by being unavailable to inconsistency, by being allergic to laziness, by refusing to be the emotional dumping ground he returns to when his life gets complicated. When you protect your energy, his ego takes the hit and his heart begins to open. When a man sees that you choose yourself first, that you're not scared to lose him, something clicks inside him. He realizes you're different. He realizes you're not playing the role so many others played before you. And that realization, it's magnetic. It attracts him. It makes him want to step up, want to claim you, want to treat you with a level of seriousness he didn't know he was capable of giving. Because the ego wants comfort, but the heart wants elevation. The ego wants praise, but the heart wants partnership. The ego wants control, but the heart wants connection. And when you challenge the ego, you unlock the heart. When you stop feeding the surface, you awaken the depth. That's why the woman who bruises a man's ego just enough to make him grow, never enough to break him, is the woman he ends up loving with madness, loyalty, and devotion. He doesn't fall madly in love with the woman who worships him. He falls madly in love with the woman who makes him better. And sometimes, making him better starts with shaking his ego, disrupting his patterns, and reminding him that real love isn't found in the comfort zone. It's found in the challenge that transforms him. A man's ego is like a fortress, built over years of experience, insecurity, and the need to prove himself to the world. It is the layer he presents to everyone, the part that says, "I've got it together, I'm strong, I am enough," even when deep down, he doubts himself. Understanding this is the first step in realizing how to connect with him on a level that most women never reach. His ego is both his shield and his barrier. It protects him from rejection, disappointment, and vulnerability. But it also keeps him from experiencing the kind of love that truly moves him. When a woman recognizes this, she sees that the way to reach his heart isn't through flattery or constant praise, but through challenge and subtle confrontation that forces him to face the truth about himself. Challenging a man's ego isn't about putting him down or humiliating him. It's about creating moments where he has to look beyond the surface, moments where he realizes that the comfort of his armor isn't enough anymore. The woman who does this sees past the performance he puts on for the world and addresses the man who exists underneath the layers of pride and self-protection. This isn't easy because it requires intuition, patience, and a sense of timing. It requires understanding when to push and when to pull back, when to provoke reflection, and when to provide space for growth. When done correctly, this kind of challenge awakens something powerful inside him. It taps into his desire to rise, to prove not to anyone else, but to himself, that he can meet the expectations of a woman who sees his potential. It creates a shift in the dynamic, moving it from one of complacency to one of engagement, from passivity to intentionality. The man who is confronted in this way cannot ignore it because it resonates at a level deeper than surface attraction. It awakens ambition, responsibility, and emotional awareness in ways that simple praise or affection never could. This is the secret many women overlook. Love grows stronger, not when a man is constantly validated, but when he is inspired to step into the man he knows he can be. The woman who challenges his ego teaches him about himself, and in doing so, she becomes unforgettable. She becomes the woman who ignites a fire inside him, the woman who forces him to reflect, adapt, and grow. He begins to associate her presence with transformation, with clarity, with the rare feeling of being truly understood and respected. This connection is magnetic because it bypasses superficial attraction and taps into his core identity. The challenge to his ego becomes a pathway to vulnerability, a bridge from pride to connection, a way for him to experience love that is intense, raw, and committed. Every subtle call-out, every refusal to accept mediocrity, every moment that makes him pause and reflect becomes a thread in the bond between them, reinforcing the truth that the woman who can reach his ego is the same woman who can capture his heart, ignite his passion, and hold a place in his life that no one else can reach. He pays attention to the woman who refuses to accept bare minimum behavior because most men are conditioned to expect compliance and easy approval. From a young age, many are taught that effort is enough if it's consistent, even if it's minimal, and they carry that into relationships. They assume that as long as they show up and do the least possible, the woman by their side will remain, but life doesn't work that way with the right woman. When a man encounters a woman who refuses to settle for half-hearted attempts, someone who doesn't applaud mediocrity or excuse inconsistency, it catches him off guard. It disrupts his assumptions and forces him to pay attention. Suddenly, he realizes that his usual patterns will no longer work, that his comfort zone has boundaries he can't cross without consequence. This is why women who have standards and enforce them command respect and focus. By refusing to accept the bare minimum, she communicates a silent yet powerful message. She values herself, she values her time, and she values the quality of love she receives. A man notices this because it challenges his ego and awakens his desire to rise. It's not about playing games. It's about drawing a clear line between what is acceptable and what is not. Men are wired to respond to challenge, especially when it's coupled with care and attention. When she refuses to tolerate excuses, when she doesn't tolerate laziness or lack of commitment, he can no longer coast. He starts observing, analyzing, and reassessing his own actions because the stakes are higher. He begins to realize that if he wants to maintain her interest, he must elevate himself. Her refusal to accept half-effort becomes a mirror, reflecting back to him the man he could be, the man he should be. This creates a dynamic where he can no longer ignore her influence. She becomes a standard against which he measures himself. Over time, that attention deepens into admiration, and admiration grows into love. He begins to invest more, care more, and commit more, because he recognizes the value she places on herself and her standards. It is not about coercion, it is about influence, through self-respect and expectation. By holding herself to high standards, she teaches him about accountability and consistency. He notices the contrast between women who tolerate mediocrity and her, and that contrast draws him in. The attention he once gave to surface-level charm now turns to substance. Her boundaries become the framework through which he evaluates his own behavior, and the desire to maintain her respect ignites passion, engagement, and effort that he may not have shown before. Men are naturally responsive to women who demand authenticity and effort because it challenges them in ways that feel rewarding and purposeful. It triggers a sense of responsibility and pride that makes him want to prove himself. The woman who refuses to accept bare minimum doesn't just capture attention. She captures commitment, devotion, and a deeper, more meaningful kind of love. The more he realizes that she cannot be swayed by convenience or superficial gestures, the more he becomes invested, emotionally and mentally, in being the man worthy of her presence, her respect, and her affection. Hurting his ego means holding him accountable, not disrespecting him, because there's a crucial difference between challenge and attack. Many women confuse confrontation with hostility, thinking that pointing out flaws or setting boundaries is somehow mean-spirited. But in reality, the act of holding a man accountable is one of the most respectful things a woman can do for him. It signals that you see him clearly, that you care enough to not let him settle for less than he is capable of, and that you are invested in the growth of the relationship. When you hold him accountable, you are not diminishing his worth. You are encouraging him to rise to a level that matches the love and standards you bring into the dynamic. Accountability forces a man to reflect on his behavior, his choices, and the ways in which he might be coasting or avoiding responsibility. It creates a space where he can confront his shortcomings without feeling attacked because the intent is growth, not humiliation. Many men are used to women excusing their laziness, tolerating inconsistency, or ignoring the gaps between their words, actions. When a woman refuses to participate in that, she breaks the pattern. She forces him to step outside of his comfort zone and face the reality of his behavior. This act, subtle as it may seem, has a profound effect on his mind and heart. It challenges his ego in a constructive way. It shows him that love is not just about acceptance, it is also about truth. Love is not only about comfort, it is also about progress. When done with clarity and intention, holding a man accountable makes him see the value of having a partner who won't settle, who won't compromise on integrity, and who won't allow excuses to dictate the terms of the relationship. The hurt his ego experiences in this process is not the pain of insult. It is the discomfort of self-realization. It's the realization that he cannot rely on old patterns to sustain meaningful connection. He starts to recognize that his actions have consequences, that his words must align with his commitments, and that the woman who demands this from him is not just any woman. She is rare, significant, and transformative. This subtle challenge sparks a shift in how he approaches the relationship. It awakens a sense of responsibility, pride, and admiration that cannot be achieved through flattery or blind approval. When a man feels that his ego is being tested in a space of respect and care, he begins to invest more not just in the relationship, but in himself. He begins to see the benefit of rising to meet the standards set before him. Accountability is a form of love that works quietly, but powerfully. It communicates that he is capable of more, that his potential is visible to someone who matters, and that the relationship is worth the effort. The woman who understands this principle doesn't attack. She elevates. She doesn't belittle. She inspires. She doesn't push him down. She challenges him to step up. By holding him accountable, she cultivates a dynamic where love is not passive, but active, where connection is not shallow, but deep, and where commitment is not optional, but essential. The effect of this approach is profound because a man learns that the woman who challenges him is the one who will ultimately command his attention, respect, and devoted love. When you choose yourself first, his ego takes the hit and his heart opens, because most men are used to women placing their needs, emotions, and availability above their own. They expect constant attention, endless patience, and unquestioning support. And for many, this creates a sense of control over the dynamic. But when a woman prioritizes herself, when she values her own time, energy, and standards above simply pleasing him, the rules of the relationship change. Choosing yourself first doesn't mean being selfish. It means setting boundaries, enforcing your worth, and demonstrating that you are not disposable. When he encounters a woman who operates this way, it disrupts his assumptions. It challenges the ego because the usual patterns that gave him comfort no longer work. Suddenly, he cannot rely on compliance or predictability. He begins to notice that his actions matter in ways they didn't before. Every decision he makes, every word he says, every gesture he shows is measured against the reality of a woman who values herself. The impact on his ego is immediate and profound. A man wants to feel needed, but he also wants to feel respected and worthy of love. When he sees that you are not willing to compromise your self-respect for the sake of comfort or security, he is forced to reevaluate his approach. He begins to understand that earning your attention and affection requires intention, effort, and alignment with the standards you set. This is where the magic happens. His heart opens. He begins to see the depth of your value, the strength of your character, and the clarity of your boundaries. The fact that you are not dependent on his constant validation makes you magnetic because it signals independence, confidence, and authenticity. A man's ego thrives on challenge, and when he encounters a woman who prioritizes herself, it challenges him in ways that awaken admiration and emotional investment. He starts to pursue not out of obligation, but out of respect and genuine desire. Choosing yourself first teaches him that love is not about possession or control, but about mutual respect and growth. It reminds him that relationships are not a one-sided effort, and that true partnership requires both parties to bring value, integrity, and intention. The more he witnesses your self-respect in action, the more he desires to rise to meet it. He begins to reflect on his own behavior, to recognize where he may have fallen short, and to strive to align with the standard you represent. This alignment is not forced. It is voluntary and heartfelt, because he sees the benefit of being in a relationship with someone who refuses to settle, who refuses to compromise her worth, and who demands authenticity. Choosing yourself first also communicates that your love is not cheap, that it is earned through consistency, care, and respect. It creates a dynamic where his ego must adjust to the reality that you are not available for manipulation, not present for convenience, and not willing to tolerate anything less than your standard. This shift triggers a deeper emotional connection, a stronger commitment, and a love that is intentional and passionate. When a man experiences a woman prioritizing herself, he learns to value her presence, her attention, and her affection in ways he never could when she allowed herself to be taken for granted. And this realization transforms his heart, his intentions, and his level of devotion. A man falls for the woman who pushes him to grow, not the one who pampers him, because true attraction is rooted in challenge, respect, and admiration, not in comfort or constant validation. Most men are surrounded by people who make life easy, who smooth over their mistakes, and who offer unconditional acceptance without encouraging change. While this may feel pleasant in the short term, it rarely inspires deep loyalty or intense love. The woman who pushes a man to grow does something far more powerful. She ignites his ambition, awakens his potential, and challenges him to become the best version of himself. She doesn't nag, criticize destructively, or attack. Instead, she sets clear expectations, holds him accountable, and refuses to settle for mediocrity in his actions, his words, or his commitments. This approach triggers a unique response in a man because it touches the core of his ego and his sense of purpose. When he realizes that his partner sees both who he is and who he could be, he begins to respect her on a level that transcends surface attraction. He notices that she is not merely interested in what he can give her at the moment, but in what he can become over time. This realization sparks admiration, and admiration is the foundation of profound love. The woman who challenges him to grow encourages him to stretch beyond his comfort zone, to confront the habits, fears, and patterns that have been holding him back. She is not seeking to change him for control or selfish gain. Her intention is to foster a connection built on authenticity, integrity, and mutual development. In doing so, she positions herself as someone rare and significant, someone whose influence matters deeply. Men are naturally drawn to growth because it appeals to their sense of pride, competence, and accomplishment. When a woman pushes him to improve, he begins to associate her presence with progress, excitement, and emotional fulfillment. This is vastly different from the fleeting satisfaction of being pampered or indulged, which often leads to complacency and stagnation. The relationship dynamic shifts when he understands that being with her requires effort, self-reflection, and consistent contribution. He experiences the joy of rising to meet her standards, the pride in proving himself worthy, and the thrill of connecting with someone who refuses to accept less than his best. Over time, this engagement transforms into deep attachment and passionate love. She becomes the catalyst for his personal growth, the mirror reflecting his potential, and the motivator that pushes him to be better not just for her, but for himself. A man's heart opens fully when he recognizes that the woman in his life is invested in his evolution, not just in his current performance. Her challenges are not obstacles but invitations, and every moment she encourages him to rise strengthens the bond between them. Love in this context is not passive or dependent. It is active, intentional, and empowering. The deeper the challenge, the stronger his admiration, and the more fiercely he commits, because he understands that the woman who pushes him to grow is the one worth pursuing, the one worth protecting, and the one worth loving with everything he has to give. Shaking his ego unlocks his heart and transforms the relationship dynamic, because a man's ego is often the gatekeeper between superficial connection and true emotional depth. Many men spend years building walls of pride, confidence, and self-protection, and these walls keep them from fully engaging in vulnerability and authentic intimacy. When a woman challenges his ego in the right way, she disrupts the patterns that have kept him safe but stagnant. This disruption forces him to reassess not just how he relates to her, but how he relates to himself. It compels him to reflect on his actions, intentions, and the way he shows up in the relationship. The subtle pressure of being challenged pushes him to rise, to consider the impact of his behavior, and to examine whether he is living up to the potential he has always known was within him. When his ego is gently shaken, he begins to feel the discomfort of realization, the unease of knowing he cannot coast or rely on old habits to sustain the bond. This discomfort, when handled with respect and care, becomes a catalyst for transformation. He starts to connect with a level of authenticity that he might have previously avoided, realizing that the woman who challenges him is not an enemy, but a guide. Her actions communicate that she values him enough to demand his best, and in turn, he begins to value her on a much deeper level. The dynamic of the relationship changes because he can no longer take her for granted. Every interaction, every word, every choice he makes carries weight because he senses the expectations and the strength she embodies. He becomes more intentional, more present, and more invested because he recognizes that this is not a superficial connection. It is a space where growth, accountability, and emotional honesty are non-negotiable. The process of shaking his ego also opens him up to vulnerability. As his defensive armor softens under the influence of her standards and boundaries, he begins to reveal parts of himself that were hidden, parts that he feared would be rejected. The woman who triggers this shift does so not by attacking him, but by standing firm in her self-respect, refusing to tolerate excuses, and holding him to a higher standard. This approach fosters admiration, respect, and ultimately, love, because he realizes that she sees his potential and refuses to settle for anything less than what he can become. Over time, the relationship transforms from one of convenience or routine into one of growth, passion, and mutual respect. Every challenge, every boundary, and every moment of accountability reinforces the reality that love is not about comfort alone, it is about elevation. The man begins to internalize that the woman who challenges him is the one who truly matters, the one who pushes him to reach beyond his limits, and the one who can hold his heart in a way no one else can. Her influence reshapes the emotional architecture of the relationship, creating a dynamic where connection is intentional, devotion is earned, and love becomes a force that inspires continual growth, deeper commitment, and an unwavering bond that transcends superficial attraction.